What's up, Colorado Realtors? I'm Scott Peterson. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Legal Bites. This is a special edition because I'm coming to you from home, and thank goodness it's not a COVID update. This is not a COVID update, but it is a pressing update on an issue that is super important for you realtors around the state of Colorado to be paying attention to, because we have a property scam that is happening very, very actively throughout the entire state of Colorado over the last month or so. It first came to my attention through a hotline call that I had received about three and a half weeks ago. And over the last several weeks, I've seen it really escalate pretty substantially. And since then, the CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, as well as more recently, FBI have gotten involved in trying to track these fraudsters down. And so linked to this video, and it's May 11th, 2022 today. And linked to this video down below, we will have a link to the advisory that was sent out jointly just last Friday, or maybe it was even just this Monday, from LTAC, Land Title Association of Colorado, Colorado Association of Realtors, of course, you all, as well as the CBI, kind of warning people that this scam is moving very rapidly throughout our state in a number of different markets. So I'm going to call it the vacant property scam, and it's primarily going to be like vacant land. And what we're seeing is these scammers, presumably from out of state, will identify through public records a vacant piece of property that has no construction on it, identify the ownership of that property. It's often an individual, or most, I think, commonly an individual, potentially a corporation, but primarily really an individual, I think, is where we're seeing these attempts go on. Just one person that's actually the owner of the property. And the scammer will identify the property address, the name of the individual who owns it, which is, of course, public record, and then try to find, in most cases, I think what we're seeing are situations where there's no loan or encumbrance or anything else against the property. There's no loan payoff. There's no other encumbrances. It's a very clean title situation. And so what this scammer will do is list the property, not on the MLS, because they're not MLS participants, of course. They are doing FSBO listings on, pick your syndication websites for real estate listings. So listing these vacant pieces of land as a FSBO for prices that are maybe a little bit too good to be true, at or maybe just a little bit below value. They make it a pretty attractive opportunity. And so whether it is through a buyer and their own research, or a Colorado realtor working with a buyer that's looking for vacant land in certain areas, subdivisions, and again, this is happening throughout the state in multiple markets over the last month or so, the FSBO listing will be identified. The broker or buyer reaches out to the fake FSBO seller, who is located generally out of state, says, hey, I'm happy to cooperate, happy to compensate, cooperating broker, all of this good stuff, and enters into a contract with a buyer. Now, the buyer at this point in time will go through the contract, and because, again, and the reason it needs to be vacant land or vacant property at a minimum is because you don't have the inspections and the need to necessarily access the property like you would if it were a residence or an office building or some other type of real estate. So again, the first trigger to any caution that you might identify for this is going to generally be a vacant piece of land, or maybe a vacant piece of property that's somehow more easily accessible for inspections and access and showings and everything else. But land works best, obviously, for all of those reasons. So they go through they put the property under contract, go through the contract, and I think what's happening behind the scene is the sellers are, with the identity of the buyer, the name of the buyer, and whatever information they can obtain on the buyer, obtaining then fake IDs, fake identification cards. And these are incredibly accessible in the dark webs, or I think even probably throughout the public internet with regard to fake IDs. Primary targets, of course, are for people that are under 21 that want to be able to purchase and consume alcohol. But for a fraudster, it works out pretty well to replicate the identification card or an identification card, driver's license of a property owner based on having their name and some other information about them. And so they're using then that ID to close or remotely, do mail out closings, because of course they're located out of state and this is just an investment property that they allegedly hold in the state of Colorado. So the title company processes the closing, the contract. Often it's a low, kind of cash deal. Not a lot of hair on the deal, so to speak. So pretty straightforward transactions is what they're really looking for. Often quick closes. Under contract, sends it to the title company processes the deal and relies on their receipt of a mail-out closing, photocopy of a driver's license, and notarized deeds, notarized closing documents, and the whole bit from the seller. Now, what the seller's doing and how they're obtaining notaries is who knows. I mean, that's either they're presenting to a real notary a fake identification card that they've obtained, or they, in all likelihood, are just obtaining a fake notary stamp or, notarizing something out of state in a fraudulent manner. Or having a fraudulent notary who's participating in the scam as well. So any of those things are possible, and that's not really the point. But if you consider the lineage of a scam like this, you try and figure out, well, where could this thing get caught up? And really, the reason that it's so important that they find vacant land, because it doesn't need to be accessed or showings don't need to be scheduled, inspections, etc. But the other important piece of this is unencumbered. So if a property was going to, if it had a loan or debt securing it, obviously that would need to be paid off prior to closing. And so through the issuance of a payoff letter or something, or the request for a payoff letter to a bank, that would probably trigger a property owner to say, hey, I didn't authorize a payoff letter, or a bank to be inquiring about us from a seller, hey, we need your permission to send this payoff. Well, none of that's in existence because, again, these are perfectly kind of clean titles. And all of this information is publicly available through, county websites and records in terms of recorded encumbrances, any deeds of trust, anything that would encumber the property. So it's pretty easy for these scammers to identify, individually owned properties that are vacant land, in most cases, and do not have encumbrances. And once that is assembled, to list it as a FSBO opportunity is particularly attractive right now. You've got a lot of buyers that are looking for real estate opportunities in Colorado, particularly in some of the remote markets, want to buy and build something. And so they're getting a lot of traction on this thing. And I'm hearing about it literally in almost every part of the state where it's being attempted. And they've been successful at actually closing a couple of transactions on this basis. The other thing I've heard about is them actually reaching out to real estate brokers or realtors in Colorado and trying to encourage them to list properties. And one of these frauds came unraveled when a realtor who was duped by one of these fraudsters went to took a listing on a property, went to put her sign in the yard or on the lot. And the actual owner of the property said, hey, what's happening here? And it kind of came unraveled that way. So please, please, please be mindful if you're seeing that kind of confluence of situations, something maybe feels a little bit too good to be true. Take some steps, some additional steps if you're working with the buyer, or if you're attempted to be engaged by an out-of-state seller who's trying to get you to list a property that just doesn't exactly feel right. Take some additional steps to research the public records yourself, do a little bit of homework, Google, all the tools that are available to you on the internet to identify that person. And don't just rely on the contact information, phone number that might be listed in the syndicated website for the FSBO listing to make and receive communication with this individual, because they can make up anything. But maybe take some additional steps to try and identify who you're dealing with independently, Googling and finding a phone number, maybe a place of business, calling that seller and trying to verify the identity if all of those things exist. Another great thing that I think would really be helpful to address this from a best practice standpoint would be to set up a Google search on your property addresses. I mean, if a seller has their property address set up as a Google search, or a Google alert. I mean, it's a free service through Google, and I'm sure there's many other sources for the same kind of information, but you set that up, and then anytime there's a new listing or a new trigger for that search term, you get a notice that that's been listed. And I think in the case particularly of something that's being listed as a FSBO on a syndicated website, when that listing goes up as a new listing on a FSBO listing on a syndicated website, if you've got your property address in there as a Google, set up as a Google alert, you're going to get a notification to say, hey, this is a new listing. By the way, your property is being sold, and it's not you. So I think that's a good protocol for your clients, for you guys to be thinking about. I think it's good to keep Google alerts actively listed on any of the properties that you own, or if you're a listing broker, any of the properties that you're listing while you're actively listing them, just to make sure you understand what's going on out there with those. So anyhow, I wanted to get out here and touch base on those items. Again, the formal alert that was sent out earlier this week is linked down below, so you can print that out. But please be mindful of this. The quicker we can put an end to these scammers and their focus on the state of Colorado and real estate in the state of Colorado, the more quickly they'll move on and find some other victims to perpetuate this kind of junk with. So anyhow, guys, hopefully this is helpful. Thank you for joining me on another edition of Legal Bites. If you want to talk about this more, if you have more specific questions, feel free to reach out to the Car Legal Hotline. As always, that's available 9 to 12 and 1 to 4, Monday through Friday. And we always love hearing from you there. So take care, guys, and please be aware that this is going on. Take it easy.